Okay, this is just terrific. The crowd. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. My name is Rick Bauer, and I'm on the executive committee of PalChase, Palliative Care in Humanitarian Aid Situations and Emergencies. And this is our fourth webinar. After 25 years in Africa, I'm now in Washington, D.C., at the George Washington Institute for Spirituality and Health, and doing chaplaincy work in palliative care at the hospital as well as Children's National Hospital. So before we introduce our incredible speakers, can I just have the other executive members that are on and just introduce yourself so people can see you?
I'll start. I'm Joan Marston. I live in Bloemfontein in South Africa. I'm on the executive of PalChase, as Rick said, with a special passion for children and ensuring that universal health coverage includes palliative care in humanitarian settings.
Hi, sorry, I was busy on chat, welcoming everybody. So I'm going to be busy on chat throughout this session. Please do continue to put your comments there. I'm Moira Leng. I'm based in Uganda at the moment, and I work with the university here in Makerere, University in Edinburgh, and also in Cardis Trust. Thanks.
I'll go next. I'm Catherine. Hi, everyone. I'm an adult palliative care physician from the UK. And I'm currently based in Amsterdam, and I'm working for MSF, Doctors Without Borders, as a palliative care specialist.
Rick, if I may, I just want to say a particular welcome to my colleague from Gaza, who's managed to join, Dr. Khamis. Welcome. It's great to see you.
Hello. Hi, how are you? The greatest person in my life. Moira, the innovator, the motivational person who have helped us not only develop palliative care programs here in Gaza, but also for the first time in Palestine, integrate these concepts into the medical curriculum here.
Okay, and oops, Megan.
Good morning, all. I'm Megan Doherty, a palliative care physician in Ottawa, Canada, and I do a lot of work in South Asia. And very nice to join you all. I'll be helping with the tech support. So if there's any problems, message me and I will try and fix them.
Well, great. I think that's everyone. Welcome again. I'm excited. This is the PalChase webinar series. This is our fourth in the series on communication, storytelling, and experience on the margins, the journey of understanding for humanitarian palliative care. I am very excited by our list of speakers. I'm going to do a brief introduction and really get to our speakers who will each be presenting. Moira is going to be kind of looking at the chat for questions, and at the end that we can have a good, and I heard during the first session that we can have a good roundtable discussion on this issue. And again, I thank you so much for joining us. So I'd first, it's my honor to introduce Smriti Rana. Smriti heads the Strategic Programs and Partnership Division at Pallium India, an organization that demonstrates, educates, and advocates for the integration of palliative care into mainstream healthcare. Her work focuses on ensuring safe access to opioids, analgesics for pain relief in India, by engaging with the central government and other stakeholders. She also works closely with the WHO and Southeast Asia Regional Office on essential drugs and medicines. She is passionate about the inclusion of people with lived experience at decision-making fora, and the role of storytelling in trauma response and resilience building, death literacy and appropriate end-of-life care, decolonizing and humanizing healthcare. Trained as a psychologist, Smriti began working in palliative care in 2001 after the loss of several family members in quick succession. Lives in the jungle with elephants, tigers, bears in her garden, butterfly expert, poetry lover, and a wonderful storyteller. Smriti, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rick. Should I begin or are we? Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Palchase, for organizing this very essential conversation, I think. I'm a little bit nervous to see so many people from so many different countries here, but thank you very much. This morning, Joan, when she introduced the session, she talked about Archbishop Desmond Tutu and his contribution and the loss that we have experienced with his passing. I just wanted to reiterate that. And she also referred to the Book of Joy, which is an exchange of conversation. It's a conversation between the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And that book has really, it's inspired me in so many ways. And what really strikes me about that whole book is that both these people have been through such incredible difficulties in life and yet find joy and inspire joy in people. And the whole book is really just a bunch of stories that they exchange between them. So, using that as a jumping off point, thank you for inviting me to talk about storytelling. I believe that it is at the crux of all human interaction. And from the time humans have walked the earth, we have placed value on storytelling, whether it's in the form of documenting stories through cave paintings or history or whatever else it might be. I really believe that at the heart of everything is the stories we tell one another. So in the context of humanitarian crises, it becomes, I think, even more important, because when a crisis hits us, our first response is really to make sense of the crisis. And how do we make sense of the crisis? Through numbers, through statistics, through trends and patterns, as we're seeing now with the COVID pandemic. But at the heart of all these trends and all this data and all these stats are living, breathing stories of individuals. And I think that if we look beyond zoom in from that macro level, what we're going to see is that, each of these individual stories are then woven into this tapestry that really tell us what the impact of an event or a crisis has really been. So that's the sort of lens that I would like to approach today's conversation with. And there are three aspects to it, the way I see it. One is, what the storyteller experiences. The second is what the listener, or what I believe is really a witness, what they experience. And finally, the facilitator, the role of somebody who elicits these stories and brings them to life, brings them forward. Not all of us believe we're storytellers, but I really think that there is a storyteller in everybody, however they choose to share. It's also important to remember that in a humanitarian crisis, the stories that we hear from individuals really they go beyond that particular moment and event. And it's the origin stories. Where do people come from? That really sort of determines how they experience something. Did they have other challenges even before the crisis hit? Were they marginalized? Did they have other vulnerabilities which were made worse by this crisis? And stories also have a way of having a futuristic, aspect to it, which is it's tied to the hopes and dreams we have, where we hope to find ourselves at the end of this crisis. And a lot of these stories are tied in with anticipatory grief and loss and things that are yet to be. So a story in and of itself has so many different dimensions to it. And I believe that not everybody approaches a story in the same way. And as facilitators, I think it's important for us to remember that what we think is important in somebody's story may not be what they think is important. And, we might be trying to elicit a story based on what we want to understand about their experience, but they might want to talk about something entirely different. And that is something that we need to bear in mind as we approach that. And listening to a story in and of itself is a skill, but it requires a little more than just sitting and, hearing a person out. Facilitating a story also is a skill that we can all cultivate. I think it's, for some people, their journey is important. For some people, what the culmination of these events lead to, that is important. For some people, they keep going back to the past, to certain moments, to certain events, and they get stuck there. And some people maybe just shut down and they don't really trust us enough to share their stories yet. It is, I think, also very important that each of us is mindful of where we are in our own stories as we enter these spaces. What do we bring into that space? Because it's not just a unidirectional conversation. Even your presence is conveying something. So to be mindful of where we are and what are we projecting onto that person. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in more detail. I think we must be prepared for surprises, and some of them are pleasant, some of them are not. Some people who we don't have too many expectations in terms of storytelling, they might absolutely astonish us with what they tell us. Bearing witness to a story, in my experience, is not a passive act. It can be an extremely powerful thing to do. And it's, when we talk about crisis and trauma-informed response, there's ways that comes up very, very often. It's resilience. And we all understand resilience in different ways. And we all know that it is a valuable thing. But resilience is only witnessed in the presence of adversity. And I also want to mention here that resilience is not a natural response to adversity for everybody. Just like when you work out and you develop certain muscles, I feel like resilience is one of those things that is cultivated over time. There is a very strong component of, an internal process there, but as important is what the person experiences externally. And this is where storytelling becomes particularly important, because the way a person's story is received, held, and reflected back can actually change the meaning of the story for that person. And, we all have these stories that we keep telling ourselves. It's almost scripted after a point, like you tell the same story over and over again. That has the ability to sort of keep reinstating and reinforcing certain ideas we have about ourselves. But at the same time, telling a story, depending on who is receiving it, is a tremendous opportunity to change the narrative. And that is something we've seen emerge when people reflect on how the story has impacted them, what it has inspired, what it has made them think about. And that is a very, very important part of the exchange in the storytelling process. I want to just quickly mention here that we all run the risk of turning people into heroes. And there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. It's very, we are tempted as compassionate people to point out how courageous somebody is, how tenacious they are, how resilient they are. But we need to pause and think, is that what they want to hear? Or do they just want to be accepted in their entirety? Do they want a safe space where they can come and be vulnerable, and that's all they want to be accepted for? And is there authenticity in what we're expressing to them? Or are we just, telling them these old tropes of what we think they want to hear? Because that may not be the case. That may not be the case. And are we only doing that to make ourselves feel better? There is a tendency for us to want to fix somebody else's story, and especially in a crisis. That may actually do more harm than good, because what we're doing is we're diminishing the parts of the story that they really want to share with us. Storytelling, I think, is by its very nature a social phenomenon. There are stories we tell ourselves, of course, but the true impact of a story is in how it is received. And it has, I think, been woven into the very fabric of humanity right from the start. And in a time of crisis, really, what I think is particularly important is the role the community plays. And if a community can come together to provide a safe space for somebody to come and tell their story, it is not only a sanctuary that we offer an individual, it is also a powerful agent of change, and it is a catalyst for resilience, and it is a catalyst for transformation. What is the connection to palliative care? Palliative care, as we all know, seeks to mitigate suffering and total pain, what we call total pain. And total pain really goes beyond somebody's physical distress. It takes into consideration every other part of their story as it's emerging, as they've experienced it. And no matter who we are, anywhere in the world, we are the protagonists of our own stories. And that's an important space for us to hold for somebody else. I think Moira will remember when we ran the Palli-COVID sessions, for healthcare workers. I think there were 12 countries that we touched. And while we talked about symptom control and end-of-life care and communication, by day 5, when we talked about distress, in just those 5 days, people had the trust to tell us stories of the distress they were experiencing in the chat box. These are people who've never met us. And that to me is phenomenal, because it demonstrates that storytelling can transcend the barriers of physical proximity. That today we have this technology available to us that allows us to even make connections over a virtual platform with people we've never met in our lives. And that's tremendous. That's something that has been an eye-opener for me, especially. Some of us here are part of a safe space storytelling circle, which initially was created by healthcare workers. It's been running now for 90 weeks. And the stories we've heard there have been absolutely, I think, transformative for every single one of us. And I just want to, close by talking about one aspect, which is the way we listen. In communications, in all our communication workshops, we talk about active listening. How do we actively listen to somebody? And there's all sorts of science around that. I want to introduce you all to the concept of generous listening, to listen with generosity of spirit. And what is generous listening? It's not as easy as it sounds. It involves suspending your judgment, suspending your own internal process. We have these questions that arise in our minds. Do I agree with what this person is saying? How can I change this part of their story for them? I don't particularly agree with that worldview. Generous listening asks you to set those aside as those thoughts emerge and really receive the story in its entirety. And I can tell you from experience that it is absolutely magical. And it's like so many people I have so much love and respect for have said that it's not just a gift we give ourselves. I mean, it's not just a gift we give our storytellers, it's a gift we give ourselves. So the greatest the greatest outcome of storytelling is really that what we're doing is, rather than what traditional empathy says, try and walk a mile in someone else's shoes, it's really to walk beside them in that very unique story that is theirs. So while listening to a story, I will also encourage you to remember that it's their story, not ours. And it's a privilege to walk alongside somebody. And that becomes even more powerful in a time of deep crisis. So I will stop with that.
And Smriti, thank you. I would just love to just jump right in, but we're going to have a couple other speakers. What caught me as the spiritual care guy is the very heart, I think, of spiritual care and palliative care is catching the story, listening to those stories that I call sacred moments. And so I'm just so excited to hear you and meet you, and thank you. And I look forward to a great discussion. Keep your questions, all of us, and we'll have the discussion after all 3 speakers. So it's my honor to introduce Lucinda Jarrett. She's the co-founder and creative director of Rosetta Life. Lucinda works with artists, adults, and children in palliative care and health professionals to devise arts projects that have a meaningful impact on the lives of people and support them to tell their stories through the expressive arts, dance, movement, music, poetry, and song. Lucinda is a writer, independent dance artist, a performance maker who co-founded Rosetta Life in 1997. She currently leads a 3-year creative intervention in the stroke community, Stroke Odysseys. She leads a Dream a Difference, a poetry and song-making project building awareness of social justice and peace across 10 countries where children are living with conflict and linking children across the world. Lucinda, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you, Palchase, for inviting me to be here. I've been asked to speak about Dream a Difference, the project that Rick mentioned. And so I'm going to tell you a bit about Dream a Difference, how it was founded, what it does, and why I believe in it and continue to be engaged with it. So Dream a Difference was founded in 2016. And many of you will remember, some of you will remember, there were images that summer of children being gassed in Syria. And my son, who was only, he's 13 now, that was 5 years ago, so he was only 8 at the time. And he saw this stream of images and said, "Mama, what can I do?" And his big sister said, "Nothing, you Wally. You're just a child." And I knew that we can't bring children up to believe they can't have any agency in the world. I also knew from all the evidence of all the performance programs we deliver that if you enable people to perform their voices and enable that voice to be witnessed, it gives agency to the people who tell the story and also gives agency to those who listen, agency to have an impact on challenging stigma, perception, and change. So we set up a poetry exchange project that in the beginning just linked Zimbabwe, Palestine, and England. And there was a magical moment the day before I was going into an English hospital school when 20 poems in Arabic arrived from a Palestinian secondary school. And I didn't know who they were from. I had no idea what they were about. And at midnight, I sent a message to the teacher saying, "I'm really sorry, but I can't read Arabic. Can you translate one for me?" And when I woke up the next morning, all 20 had been translated into English and she'd been up all night. So that sense, the reason I tell that story is this project from the beginning has been imbued with that sense of commitment from everyone. It's not well funded, it's funded with the generosity of people who engage with the project. Now the project runs across 11 countries and there are 20 participating centers. The reason that we do it in this way is because I believe that peer-to-peer learning is the site of healing for young people. So we connect children in conflict in Syria, children living in Palestine, refugee camps in Uganda and Rwanda, children's hospices in Zimbabwe and South Africa, and children's center in Nepal, and children in primary schools that have been burnt down from forest fires in California, with children's hospital schools, children in foster care and young carers and schools in the UK. And when children, we all know from bereavement work, from grief work, from children's play, that the site of learning and healing is actually in the playground. If you can enable children to connect, understand, and engage and create together, the site of healing is in the moment where children play and connect together. So the first reason is because I think that peer-to-peer learning is a site of healing. Secondly, because I think in a world that's increasingly insular, and perhaps for me more than anyone else in England, where we've gone through Brexit and have cut ourselves off from open European borders, the looking inwards is frightening, and to engage in our recognition that the global community is our shared responsibility is really important for children's learning. It's not something happening out there, but actually it's in the Zoom frame next to you. We're only centimeters apart when you engage online. And the world is increasingly smaller, and our global community becomes our community when it's forged online in this way between children. And thirdly, because I think that this way of learning is critical for children, to engage in learning by learning from each other. And I'm going to share a small story that I shared this morning from a refugee camp in Uganda and a primary school in England. So in Uganda, a young boy wrote this poem. He was 8 years old. Fish, 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 you are great. You are my hero. My grandmother sells fish. My mother sells fish, all to get money and pay my school fees. Fish, fish, fish is my hero. You saved my uncle from death. He was poisoned, but mummy sold fish. The money saved my uncle. Fish, you are so great. Fish, you are my hero. You can imagine the discussions that were had when that Ugandan child read that to a primary school in England. What? You don't get fish fingers, was one comment. We find it on our fish is in the supermarket. You have to fish for fish, and you don't get access to the doctor unless you can get a fish, was one. This whole understanding of different economies, different health happened at that level of one child speaking to another. And this was one child's response. He's also 8. I buy fish. You've got all the fish. I buy fish. You catch the fish. Splish, splash, splosh. Salmon, trout, cod and haddock. We name them all on supermarket shelves. All fish comes in packets and cellophane to us. We buy fish fingers in cardboard boxes. You catch it from running water. Splish, splash, splosh. I'm really glad fish saved your uncle. I'm glad fish saved your school. Build your own supermarket one day. Sell fish to lots more people. Splish, splash, splosh. I have fish and you have fish. Because you caught the fish, I've got fish. And that really young dialogue is at the heart of this, of peer-to-peer learning. Of course, we had huge fun and laughter when a Ugandan boy brought a bucket and a stick and a string trying to explain to us how to catch fish. But equally, there's a real opportunity for shared learning. This isn't about UK schools looking at another community in the third world and looking at them with pity or compassion. It's about shared learning among equals, and often gives rise to invisible voices in the UK. In another instance, a young girl in Palestine spoke about how she missed her best friend who'd been killed in a bomb. And it gave a young girl in the UK the chance to share a poem that she'd never shared before about how she missed her friend who died of cancer. And she said, every night I recall her face, the dimples on the side of her cheek, the way her nose wrinkled when she laughed. And she spoke of that as a way of offering healing for the other child. Why don't you make the same poem? Recall every night before you go to sleep, the face of the friend you lost. And so these shared moments of learning are incredibly powerful, profound moments that happen online. As the project grew, we wanted to be ambitious for the young people. We can publish anthologies of poems and send them across the world. They never get to Palestine. The books get shipped back. They never get, but we can publish these, but we wanted to be ambitious. These children are bearing witness to each other and are powerful agents of their own change. So what we thought we could do is we also wanted to create a democratic shared experience. In 2019, we created an experience in the Royal Albert Hall with a chorus, which is the largest concert hall in England, with a chorus of 1,600. But children in Bangladesh and Syria contributed film to that, but they weren't part of that event. So they felt they were giving something to another country. So we knew we had to change and we needed to learn. So we devised a 360 film. Everyone has the shared experience through Google Glasses or through planetariums. We're hijacking planetariums in Nepal and South Africa so people there can see this 360 film. The same film will be seen, whether it's through Google Cardboard or in the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco in a panoramic dome. And this will enable children not only to share poems individually, but create a shared collective poem that will become a song that will then become a 360 film. And this ambition is important because if we have ambition for the young people, they have ambition for their own leadership and their own agency and their own capacity to deliver change. So I was going to read one poem, a shared poem that was written between the Cotswold School in the UK and a refugee camp in Rwanda. It's structured as a shared poem, so it's a call and response poem. And I'll just read it like that. UK. Home is a place where memories are made. It's somewhere safe. It's a cocoon. It's somewhere you can dream. Rwanda. Home is a place I was not safe. Now there are people who love me, people who take care of me. I did not have peace, but now I have freedom, happiness, and comfort. No longer a street kid, branded homeless. Now I have home. It tastes of honey. It's all the fuel I need for my journey. Chorus. Home is a memory, a smell of candles, cookies in the oven. It's the taste of honey. It's fuel for all our journeys, keeping us safe. UK school. Ah, now I understand. Home is more than a roof over our heads. For some, home is a sadness only understood when out of reach. It's our food and flame, ours with an easy life, the pain and longing of others. For some, home is a yearning that demands a return. For all of us, it's the anchor we hold on to, the hand that homes the kestrel. Chorus. Home is the safety of our rights. We know we have the right to a home, a roof over our heads. God grant us the memory of the homes we left behind, the taste of honey, fuel for our safari. UK, home is the shell I can hide away when there's conflict in the family, when the treatment of children is unfair, when my rights are lost, when I'm unsafe. Home is where my rights are forgotten. Home is a shell I can hide away. It's a shelter from the crash of rain, the bang of thunder, the fear of strangers. Home is a shelter from the pain where I can hide away. The amazing thing about that poem to me is the last verse was written by a child in the UK who's gone from care home to care home, who only had permission to say that because the child in Rwanda stood up and told him about his right to a home and a place of safety. So this shared learning becomes really, really important. I can't say it enough. The projects now in the UK are taught across curriculums, across geography, ethics, ICT and technology, and of course, English literature and language and music. And for me, the most important thing about this is that it's not set up to deliver health outcomes. It's set up to deliver an imaginative opportunity to children to dream, an imaginative site where creativity is the heart of the process and the outcome And the healing is in that process. And that's what's most important of all. That in storytelling, it's not driven as therapy, it's driven as creativity. And creativity is healing in and of itself because it touches us all at the heart of our humanity. A famous theatre maker called Peter Brook once said, all we have in life is the lived experience of our felt relationship. And if we can't articulate and express that, we are nothing. So for me, this project is really dear to my heart. And I'm really, really privileged to be part of the journey of all the children who engage with it. I want to mention one thing because I know that it's really important.
Yeah.
This idea of power.
And Lucinda, I want
inequality.
you to
One
go
second.
on for, but if you can begin to wrap up, I want you to go on for hours, but thank you.
This is the last thing. It's just a sentence I conclude with. That what we fight so hard to counter is this idea of inequality of power and create a shared space where children are communicating as equals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I apologize for having to interrupt. It is now my great pleasure, and it's so good to see you, Sophie. It's been too long. But to introduce my colleague, my friend, Sophie Kieffer. She's passionate advocate for global pediatric and adult palliative care. She's worked in a variety of settings in hospice and palliative care programs in Eastern and Southern Africa. She has a master's degree from Georgetown University, has volunteered in public health and nutritional programs with government and non-governmental organizations in Ecuador, Israel, Nepal, and Lebanon. Sophie has recently supported a new palliative care efforts in Somalia and South Sudan, and she's presently a consultant with the African Palliative Care Association. Welcome, Karibu, Sophie.
Thank you, Father Rick. Nice to see you as well. And I just wanted to start by saying hello, and I'm so grateful to be on this call with so many people that I met either in person or on the screen from so many parts of the world. And it can be a lonely space going from place to place. And this, seeing even just the attendees of this call reminds me how we're in this together and how many people have supported me along the way. So thank you for that. And I just wanted to start briefly with this photo. And this is by Muneb Taim, who is a Syrian photojournalist, and this was with his permission to share. And he wrote below, on World Theater Day, Walid al-Rashed went out among the ruins. He sang in Arabic the words of a famous song, "How beautiful it is to live in peace and wellness," as he wrote on the wooden board while the sounds of bombing were heard in the sky. So thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to start with that. I think it's a beautiful and complex image that we could, I'm sure, again, have another session about. But I'm showing it today because I think, we can look at things in many ways. And for me, this shows, this is a moment. This isn't changing the future or dealing with the past. It's right now. And they created this beautiful, you can create a stage anywhere, and you can have a relief and distraction or healing in places you might not expect. So I'm just grateful that he was able to capture that and that the children had this moment. So thanks for sharing that. And then I just wanted to discuss today a few other, these are all more anecdotal experiences. And I just wanted to start also by saying, I think we've all had many personal examples, and, I work in these places often as a volunteer and often not as a clinician. And I have the time and the luxury to really see what's lacking and what other pieces to add. And also this can be very different between countries. So I'm just going to share a few things which definitely may not work in places that you are, might not be appropriate. And but they've worked in these areas. And even within that, I've made plenty of mistakes. I once tried to host a party for 80 children and thought I could make chicken and chips within 2 hours, and it took about 7. And in the end, people went home with like 1 French fry. So, it's we've all, but it's part of the process of learning and trying together. So I think that, especially one example, I'm going to start with this in Somalia. I think, Somalia, even the word has a lot of connotations. And one thing that I struggle with is often in budgets, in programs, in sectors, where does play fit in? Where does dance fit in? How do we measure it? Where is it valued? How do you prove its success? And I remember being at a hospital in the Southwest state in Baidoa, Somalia, and, in the pediatric ward, there was no color, there was no toys. And this is not at all to, blame the hospital. They barely have medicine. But I think, what can we do, or how can we add without taking away from what already the struggles are, but what can we add? So my smaller local NGO was able to, with a little bit of pushing from me, but with a very thoughtful discussion about what could we bring in. In the end, they found Somali toys and mattresses that we could put outside, so families could, when they were sitting outside of the clinic, they could sit and not on the cement, but on something soft. And I think there's, or for example, in Kenya, we were able to bring in a magician. Now, a magician might not be, it could be taboo in some place, glorified, it could be something that's joyful in another place, but this happened to work in Nairobi. And it was something that, I was so worried about how will the children react. And we were in a burn ward, and then all the mothers wanted to be the assistants to the magician. And it reminded me how much, as we all work in palliative care, we think about the family, we think about everyone involved, not just the child or the patient. So it was a good reminder, how do we include siblings? Siblings are so often left out or sitting at the clinic or lonely or feel not attended to. They might just be bored, they might be out of school. So how do we include that? I think is a really important measure. But I remember even in that Kenyan clinic that someone said that he was asked to measure how well the clown that we had brought in had done by how many smiles he had received. And even then he thought, but not all the children smile. Some of them, whether that's because they don't want to or because they can't, and then, or they're young. And so do they not like it? And it is challenging, of course, with children who are nonverbal maybe, but what are ways that we can look for gentle signs, or how do we find less ways that we have to prove success in the same way? How do you prove joy, especially when joy is fleeting? When we look at healing, that can mean many things. So just to think about small ways that may not be, we talked in the last session about bubbles. I find bubbles a very helpful tool just to lighten the mood. Most people like it, any age, everyone's running around catching it, from the cleaner to the child, so that's one example. And I was recently in South Sudan as well. And in South Sudan, again, these sort of, when we think of South Sudan, people think of, oh, so do you work in the health sector, in the water sector, which sort of, and it's like, no, you work in like not in the joy sector, but I guess, and just sort of where do you fit into all that and how do you add that value to the programs? And I remember being in a place where we were doing aerobics, or we were doing these, activities, and everyone could count to 3. So we counted to 3 in different languages, and you put your arms up 3 times, and, people started coming around and doing it as well. And something like that you can do in a place where there's, sometimes in a IDP camp, an internally displaced persons camp, you may have thousands of people. So maybe bringing in toys is not a useful tool given the amount of people, but you could have a few hundred or even 1,000 people together doing some kind of aerobic activity or dance. So that's a way. And again, that doesn't always work, but it's worth a discussion. And it's certainly been a joyful thing for me to be a part of and to learn from, and to be on the other side. And then also music. And again, I think we all know the value of music for ourselves, not for everyone, but when I was in Somalia, I usually try to learn a little bit of a language, but the Somali is a challenging language for me. But I could sing a little bit. So I learned a local Somali song from a singer from the community I was working in. From YouTube, I started actually, and then I met him in person in rural Somalia, and we ended up singing together. But just knowing a few lines of his song, I could go somewhere where people can't even say hello, but I could sort of start singing and everyone kind of turns to look at you, you know. And I remember the driver for the NGO, who also does not speak any English, to this day will call me on, you know, Facebook audio just to do a little call and response. So, you know, I think these are things, and again, singing, you know, is more comfortable for me and not for everyone, but it doesn't matter how you sound. And even if you mess up the words, people love seeing you try. And I think, you know, when we are visiting places that maybe are not what considered your own, or you may be more of an outsider, and that's something I, you know, try to more thoughtfully and struggle with often, there's a way to sort of just embrace that. Like, you're right, this isn't my language, this isn't my song, and I'm excited for you to be the teacher. And that can be a child, that can be asking the sibling, hey, can you teach me how to talk, how to, you know, do a game with you or something like that. And just another example, I think also when I was in Lebanon, working with Syrian teenagers, this was not as much in a palliative care setting, but as we're talking about people who are not living necessarily in their home country, some people want to talk about where they're coming from and many do not. Some people want to remember songs from their home or things they used to do, and some do not. But I think, you know, teenagers, for those of you that work with them or have them, and we all were them, it can be an interesting group. And one thing I found was like learning, you know, rap songs, or learning, you know, about who's sort of popular in other places, and just using that as that initial discussion. And even if it has nothing to do with anything, you know, I remember in Somalia, a woman who really, a colleague of mine, who did not, you know, warm up for a long time. And then I found out she could do henna. And I asked if she would just do my hand. And she said, if I do your hand, I have to do your foot. And, you know, by the end, my foot is in her lap. And she's telling me, you know, about all her struggles as a woman, but also how she's overcome certain things, you know. And I'm, you know, it's not that it was a success. It was just a connection. And it wasn't, and as Smriti talked about, you know, I think we struggle with what do we do with a story, and how do we make it not just like a token story that is either for funding or to show people the power of culture. But I think, you know, we forget, like, we all love exchange and we're all curious. You know, my Somali colleague had never met, you know, someone from the US. So he was just fascinated, you know, what I ate for breakfast. You know, it wasn't like, what are you here to bring me and what are we sharing? So, so that's just been really helpful. And I think, you know, when it comes to needs, I think, you know, there's a lot of pressure to, for example, I'll just say one more. When I was in South Sudan, I wanted to bring some, you know, toys and bubbles to a hospital. And my colleague who had gone to do an assessment said, you know, what they really need is nutritional supplements. And he's absolutely right. And they absolutely need them. But nutritional supplements are easier to apply for a grant or to ask UNICEF, or to, you know, or they get a shipment at a certain time. But there's not always a slot to sort of who do you ask for the toys, or who do you ask for an instrument or for colors or something. And, you know, even something I remember asking women at a home for children with disability, you know, what they wanted: aprons. They wanted aprons to feel like they had something to put on when they got to work, or that they had something, and they wanted, you know, their name on it, you know. And who do you ask for that, or what part of a budget does that fit in? And often those are the things that are considered, you know, luxuries. So I guess my hope also is just to think more about that everything is valuable. And, you know, just because someone's from a place that we are used to calling a conflict country, which is a challenging name in itself, you know, a child doesn't care if they were born in Somalia or the US. They're bored, they want to play, they want to talk, you know. And so to just sort of help equalize, you know, what is considered valuable and comforting, and really palliative care. And just sort of, I think our hope is to just reduce suffering, whatever that looks like. So thank you very much.
Well, great. And thank you all. Before I introduce my colleague Joan, and we're going to look at some of the questions I know in the chat, but open this up for discussion. For all of you, for Sophie, Lucinda, and Smriti, one of the things I was thinking of that I didn't hear specifically is all of these incredible interventions of storytelling, communications, poetry, movement for our patients. I'm in 2 hospitals now with this Omicron surge that I have never seen anything like. How can we use these skills for our staff, for our nurses? And I find myself, Smriti, sitting on the floor and listening to these sacred stories of nurses dealing with this Omicron, and incredible. I just love to be able to talk about staff support. But before we get into that, I want to introduce Joan Marston, who's going to help me lead this discussion. Joan.
I'm muted. Sorry about that. Hi there. I think before we even start the discussion, because at present there are no questions in the chat, I'd like to ask Lucinda to repeat the question that she asked of her co-speakers this morning, because I think it raised such an important issue that we need to be very, very careful about.
Thank you, Joan. I was struggling because, of course, stories aren't just told through words, as Sophie's photo showed. Stories are told visually. Every photo is a story. No matter how many angles you look at it from, someone else's story is there. And when you're sharing stories, the audience will always see the photo you took with honesty and authenticity in different ways. So I wondered, Sophie, how you approach photography in your practice, either to share photos at home or to use it in reports or to help tell the stories. How do you approach the ethics and the thinking behind the photography that tells those stories?
Thanks, Lucinda, and I'm looking forward to putting it right back to you guys as well, as this is a very challenging issue that I have not, I really haven't figured out. And some of it, over the years, you think, because it's really human to human basis, and so, someone told me, you can ask certain people, they don't always know what it means when you said, can I use your photo, even if they consent? What does that really mean? Does it mean you're using it to get money? I had a friend who was really ill in one of these places, and he said, show whatever you need to get me this chemo. He's like, I don't care I want the outcome. And then other people said, I don't want any of this, or I've had my story told 80 times and I've been on a wait list for this, UN services for the last 3 years. So it's such a range of what it looks like. And also, I think we're sometimes it's hard either way. If you show something too sad, people, use these words, and I'm only using this in quotations, of like poverty porn. And then in another side, people can say, well, don't show a child smiling because it diminishes what's really going on. And maybe they're smiling that moment, but they're suffering right next, or just because they laugh doesn't mean they're happy. So I'm much better at throwing out questions than answers. But I guess one thing I try to do is I think this is where the story is important, but also if you're able to have a discussion with the family or with the organization of what is a way you can talk about a program. Or for instance, I often show photos of my colleagues when they feel comfortable, who present the project. So, and we are all in it together, and I want to show how, what they've gone through and what they're doing. And there's a lot more consent and sharing. So maybe it doesn't pull the same way as a child. But to me, they are the heart of the program. So that's one way. But yes, I struggle often, even with my own personal social media and other things, and certainly haven't gotten it right. And one person gave me some advice that sometimes works. They said, to only put up photos of people their name. And obviously in the consent world, you would know their name, but people that enough that you could actually talk about your relationship with them, as opposed to sort of a general child that you met. So I think about that.
Moira, I know this morning you had an answer for our challenge, didn't you? Because I've often, when we're illustrating, when we talk about visual poetry, we ask people to send photos, and they assume we want photos of children dancing, but we want the poem illustrated. And there are lots of challenges, as much about what we ask as the balance of what people think we want, and how to train and educate people. And you had an amazing initiative that you were developing. It'd be lovely to hear about.
Well, thanks, Lucinda. I think this is a real challenge, and it'd be great to know, put in the chat or other people's experience. What we're trialing, if you like, is an evaluation tool called Photo Voice, because I think you're absolutely right. telling stories through images, providing they're the people who own those images stories. And that's a tricky thing, isn't it? And we discussed that this morning, who takes the photo, who chooses which photo. So the way in which we'll be using photo voice, or are using it, with a fragile population, so that's a host and refugee population in the north of Uganda, is actually a formal process whereby you train community members. We're using trained village health teams, like community health workers, who are part of the communities. We're training them in how to take photographs, but also in the ethics and consent issues of photographs. We're learning as much, to be honest, as we're training, and it's Ugandan colleagues that are doing that training. And then when the photographs are taken, it will be the community decision, and no evaluator will be around. But those photographs will then come together with the community, able to then one, give consent that anything that's shared, and then afterwards to say what the themes are that they're seeing in those photos, and then to decide as a group which photos best represent those bits of their story. And it will be an experience, a lived experience story. So we'll see. I mean, it was very warmly received, and I hope that by having the community leaders engaged, we might be able to get something really from the community themselves. We have put it through a formal ethics procedure, because there is, using photographs as data, we've talked about that before, can be really tricky. So we'll keep you posted, and if anyone else has any other experience, Lacey, it looks as though you have that experience. Yeah, I agree, Lacey, you can use it as a pragmatic evaluation tool, or you can use it as a formal research tool, and we've decided to go down the latter, really because of the consent issues in our fragile populations, but I totally agree it can also be used as an evaluation tool. Thanks for asking. We do have a couple of questions, Rick and Joan. I don't know if you've seen them there in the questions there.
So if I may just come in for a moment on this particular issue. As someone from a low and middle income country, which we now call the global south, I find that desperation can compromise dignity in what we allow. But always the locus of control for ensuring dignity lies with the person who's offering the assistance. And I mentioned this in the morning, where I have personally, I'm not comfortable with the word helping, and in the sense that reinstates a power dynamic, and we are in a position where we can assist somebody to or give them a platform. And when we talk about people with lived experience, I think that those of us who have, I'm going to quote this is one of the quotes that has really sat with me, where if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. So how do we change that dynamic? And really, and when somebody is really sick, as we see in palliative care, or somebody who's really going through a tremendous, the devastating impact of a humanitarian crisis in an already vulnerable population, they may not have the ability to speak up at that point. So I just want to, reinforce the idea of power dynamics here, and it's really incumbent on the person offering the assistance to ensure that we stay focused on that. Somebody might say, I don't care what you put up as long as you ensure that I get what I need. But even so, we still have to view it from a lens of, are we compromising their dignity? Are we violating their sense of autonomy in some ways? Or are we inviting them to really be, shared decision makers? And shared decision making is such a vital part of palliative care, isn't it? I won't go on for too long, but there's this one quote, which is, to understand racism, you need to understand power dynamics. To understand sexism, you need to understand power dynamics. To understand poverty, you need to understand power dynamics. You can apply that to anything. But to understand power dynamics, you need to listen and believe the stories of the powerless. But that takes a certain amount of self-reflection, consistent self-reflection on the part of those offering that assistance. So I just wanted to just leave that,
Thank you, Smriti, and thank you all of you for answering that really difficult and complex question that we always need to be aware of what is basically human rights in all that we do. And I do see that we do have from Dr. Alessi a comment, actually, which I think is really important, where he talks about the increasing evidence that the doctor-patient relationship, and it could be with any member of the healthcare team relationship, the communication skills, the eye contact, and the has a really positive impact on the clinical condition and on quality of life. And I think from what you've told us, singing, dancing, poetry, storytelling is all part of that positive impact. So I don't know if anyone would like to comment on that, and thank you. Thanks, Dr. Alesi, for that comment.
Can I comment briefly?
Yes.
I just think in response to that, in terms of power dynamics, there's some really interesting thinking by a philosopher in England called Professor Javi Carrel, a phenomenologist, and she separates the experience of illness, the lived experience of illness, from the disease. And she says if you're looking at the symptom and cure of the disease, you're involved in a power dynamic with a doctor who knows the answer. But the minute you engage in the story of your experience of illness, you're equal storytellers and witnesses. And I think that's really lovely, that we often undermine the experience of illness in our privileging of the need to cure a disease. But actually, as we all know, people often live well with an experience of illness, and happiness isn't necessarily an effect of disease or not. Thank you.
Yes, I think that's a wonderful quote. Thank you, Lucinda. And then just maybe as we're running out of time, just another question from Dr. Das, who has asked the speakers, what sort of support and coordination do you get from government, or do you get anything, especially when we're looking at conflict and humanitarian situations? Or is this an area where the interaction with government is actually not so strong?
One of the tenets of, when you look at, I remember talking to somebody who works in humanitarian aid, and one of the key issues there is of social justice and allocation of resources. And very often resources are allocated to those who have maximum chance of survival. And this is where the intersectionality with palliative care really comes in. Because, if you're a recipient of palliative care, chances are you're not on top of that triaging, triangle. And I think this is where the dialogue really needs to begin, because we've seen this happen, with the pandemic. Early part of the pandemic, we saw what happened in Italy, and then, across the board, it sort of had a ripple effect. But talking about government engagement, I think it begins with having these conversations, and I don't want to say educating, but really putting these stories out in the forefront and saying that, just because somebody is vulnerable or marginalized does not mean they're not deserving of the resources that would otherwise be allocated to those who have a better chance of survival. And which is why I was so glad when Palchase had that whole webinar on, the impact of climate change on palliative care and humanitarian aid and all of those things. So again, it belongs with, it starts with dialogue. It starts with really us clarifying what it means, being able to articulate it to those decision makers, presenting it in a way which is evidence-based. And really it comes down to the value of life, right? So no one human being is more valuable than the other, but it's a very tricky conversation to have. To answer the question, how much support do we get from governments? I would say in the context of palliative care, humanitarian crisis, we have a long way to go. And it comes from the fact that we still, I don't know as a community if we have articulated the need well enough. And that's something we need to work on.
I just want to add also, I think it's important to have more honest conversations. Like we're talking about power dynamics, and, you know, this is not to call out any country or government, but I think those of us anywhere in the world know that there's a lot more going on than just a donor and a government. There's payment issues, there's community issues, there's who's in power and who are they related to. There's all these things that can be very complicated to be honest about, or to have in an open forum, and they often kind of happen on the side, or when you really get to the ground and someone tells you the real story, or what do you pay to get what you need and who has done that already. So I think, you know, that may sometimes be off the table, but I think until we sort of address that, the same things will happen, and the same people will be funded, and the same things won't get through. So, you know, whether you believe in it or not, we all know it's happening.
Thank you.
Sorry.
But I'll just say one thing briefly.
Thank you. Sorry, Lucinda, were you speaking?
I was just going to say about support. We're lucky in that the Arts Council may not fund chemotherapy, but they fund storytelling in palliative care context. And the arts and health drive is now really, it's probably again a condition of the privilege of the global north, but arts and health is very well evidenced now. And in the World Health Organization, we have Chris Bailey, who's now advocating for arts and health and pioneering arts and health programs. And at a local level, we now have a government funding program that our organization is a case study of best practice for, that is actually about socially prescribing arts and health. So we're at a point in England where you can go to the GP and you can prescribe storytelling, which is quite magical. But I know that's very much a privilege of the global north. But I'm aware that in terms of funding and support, the Arts Council and the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, our government in the culture and the arts, are increasingly aware that the arts have a huge impact on our mental health.
Thank you, Lucinda. And maybe that leads into what will have to be, unfortunately, the last question, and is that how does one develop the skill of storytelling? Would anyone like to take a shot at that one? Maybe just very briefly, as our time is becoming limited. And then I'll hand back to you, Rick.
Briefly, there are loads and loads of courses out there. There are lots of courses around storytelling in health. There's
and Preston.
There's also the idea of just telling your story. And, you know, there's this particular intervention in psychology, which is about rewriting your script. Write your script, write your script, write your script. And you'll find that things start to change depending on what you're experiencing. So it's really about revisiting your story and having, I mean, like I said earlier, some of us believe we're not storytellers, but I believe everyone is. But it takes practice. So just keep telling your story and you'll hit the right notes.
Yeah. And remember, it's your story. And you tell it the way that you feel you need to tell it. You don't have to follow any rules.
You don't have to follow rules, but if you're trying, I know there are lots of questions in the chat about how can you use this skill. And I know that in care, lots of healthcare professionals we work with in hospitals struggle with finding the time to listen to stories or to work out what to do with them or to help people. And sometimes telling the story again and again, you get stuck. So sometimes you just need something to help you see your story from another set of eyes. And that, I think, is about listening and noticing and being part of a conversation.
I just want to say one last thing to the same point. I think what's really important, what I said earlier is tell your story again and again. It's very important to be aware of, are you being performative or are you being authentic?
So, a really important point.
Yeah, so storytelling, art, music, etc., it has a quality of being performative as well. So are you performing or are you going inward? And that really sort of changes the story in many ways.
So thank you all, and thank you for the questions that have come up. And I'm going to hand back to you, Father Rick, for to wrap up. And I think Moira would like to say something about the Indian Association Conference. Yeah.
So yeah, this is it's my chance to thank everybody and to kind of wrap us up. So before we get into those final announcements, Moira, welcome to speak a little bit about an upcoming event and conference and more.
Thanks so much. I think this conversation could continue. So please think about continuing it by joining the Indian Association for Palliative Care conference. And I've got information hot off the press even from this morning. So this is being held virtually in Jaipur, which is a shame for those of you who visited Jaipur. It's beautiful. For those of you who haven't, please do try. I was interested after this morning's discussions that actually they have a creative space as part of this conference, and that's something that's being built for the last few years. But I particularly want to invite you to a workshop on palliative care and planetary health. We're going to look more at some of these issues. This now, as of this morning, is now free to all registrants. This is the link here. We'll put it in the chat. It's been sponsored by Carter, so you can just come, join. Let's get a really good conversation going about this issue, and also add to the richness of the Indian conference. So 10th of February, you're very welcome. We will share it in Twitter and mailings. And just so you know, there's the section of the website which is asking for creative expressions. So you're feeling creative, have a look there. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yes, consider joining. And I think this is what it's continuing the story and continuing, the telling of our own stories, and then that powerful listening and being present as others tell their stories. So thank you all for joining us today. This is, I think it's one of our biggest webinars, but we're so delighted to have this as we continue this global conversation and story about the need for palliative care and integrating it into all situations. I also want to thank Megan Doherty, who has been behind the scenes and helping us with the IT and keeping this going. She's put in the chat some links, both to get feedback is really important. To join PalChase, use that link to send this out. We're a new organization, and all of us on the executive are just passionate about this. So we just want to grow the membership and see where this absolutely takes us. And so it has been a delight to be with each of you. I also know there was a little confusion because we had to use one link for the morning session and the evening session, and we thank you for bearing with us. As we got this together, we hope to fix that maybe the next time, but thank you for your patience. It has been a delight to join you this morning. I am so very pleased that you were all able to join us. And so thank you. And with that, unless there's a hand up or anything else from the others on the committee, thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you hopefully we'll see you at the Indian Association of Palliative Care. And then we'll also see you April 20th is our next PalChase webinar. The teaser, the details, and the content to be announced. Stay tuned. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.